Now, Mali's military leader, General Assimi Goita, has suspended all political party activities indefinitely, citing public order concerns. And this move comes shortly after a rare pro-democracy protest in Bamako and amid debates over a proposed law to dissolve political parties. Let's remember that since taking power through coups in 2020 and 2021, the military has repeatedly delayed elections, raising alarms among citizens and international observers about the erosion of democratic governance. United Nations experts who argue that the suspension violates basic freedoms like the rights to political participation and free assembly. Now, the question here is, can long-term security and stability truly be achieved by silencing democratic voices? This is what we're going to, dissect at the moment and unpack. We have Dr. Mohammed Dan Suleiman, founding director, Center for Alternative Politics and Security, West Africa, in Saudi Arabia at the moment. And we also have Daniel Eizenga, PhD, Research Fellow, Africa Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen, on the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so first of all, I would love to hear your thoughts, Daniel, on this suspension and the fact that the suspension followed a rare pro-democracy rally in Bamako, which was held by hundreds of activists, defying heavy security presence as well. Share your thoughts on how significant you feel the protest was.
I think it's very significant because the junta in Bamako has been trying to clamp down and repress any kind of dissent and criticism of its time in power, really, since the first coup in 2020. And you mentioned in your lead-in that they had the first coup in 2020 and a second coup in 2021, and they've really professed to be committed to a transition to civilian rule ever since that initial coup. But if you sort of look at the actions they've taken since, they just continue to kick the can down the road. And this is sort of the latest attempt, I think, in their process of doing exactly that. In addition to this proposal to dissolve political parties, there's also a proposal to appoint Assimi Goita as president for the next 5 years, renewable for another 5 years after that. And so I think what's happened here is that we've had the veil kind of pulled back on the junta, and they really are in a process of trying to establish military rule and dictatorship over Mali for the next 10 years. And that sparked this protest by political parties and activists for democracy in Mali, and it is quite rare. It hasn't been seen that you've had this type of criticism against the junta in such public displays and in such large numbers in Bamako in recent years. And so I think they're reacting to that, and unsurprisingly, they're reacting in a very forceful way that could press civil dissent and disobedience, and we hope that it won't result in violence in the streets.
Oh, we hope so too. Now let's hear from you, Dr. Suleiman, because most quarters have actually condemned the suspension as a basic violation of human rights. So do you agree as well? Do you believe that suspending all party activities risks eroding Mali's civic space and violating basic human rights?
Yes, I think that is very clear. Not only does the suspension violate the basic human rights of Malians, it also goes against a lot of international guarantees of human rights. And for example, there's the African Charter for People and Political Rights, which gives citizens the right to participate in the politics of their countries. There are also several UN charters that this decision actually violates. And for me, the fact that Assimi Goita and his government have consistently postponed elections and violated transition periods, and this time taking away the rights of the people it shows that the people are getting impatient with the government, and the government are beginning to realize that if it doesn't take those measures, then it may lose the clout that it has before the people. So yes, it will continue if things don't change. If the suspension is not revoked, if the government continues to insist on revoking, suspending the rights of the people, and taking such actions, then I think a lot more people will continue to criticize Mali, and then it will make the government extremely very unpopular.
All right, well, still on you, Dr. Suleiman, because Daniel actually touched on this a bit. How does the proposed bill, that aims to dissolve all political parties, align with Mali's commitment to democratic governance and international norms?
I think it is fair to say at this point that the Malian government rarely thinks about commitment to democracy at this point. In as much as it is unpalatable to admit, I don't think that the government is really concerned. It's interested to some extent, but at this point, I believe that the psyche of the government is such that this is, to quote the famous sayings of the Burkinabe leader Ibrahim Traore, this is not a democracy, but this is a revolution. This is not to say that Mali is like Burkina Faso, but I think these leaders at this point are willing to set aside all democratic principles in favor of what they call stability, so that they can bring these countries back in line before they can talk about democracy. In their thinking, many transition governments have failed not because elections were delayed, but because elections were held too early. So I think it goes to the very core of democratic principles, but I doubt if the government is actually at this point interested in the yardstick, the democratic yardsticks that we use to judge a government.
All right, so let's hear from Daniel. Daniel, looking at the suspension of these political activities, right? Because you've talked about how these coups had actually promised, a return to democracy, but they keep postponing and they keep stalling. But with the suspension of these political activities, are there any avenues, for Malians to be able to, participate or, participate in governance, or even, let out or express dissent? Are there any avenues?
I think that increasingly we're seeing that what avenues exist are very risky. And we've seen that the junta in the past has arrested its critics, journalists, it's arrested leaders of political parties, civil society activists, and it's really gone after those folks that are willing to take a stand and voice their criticisms and dissent against the junta's actions. I think that the sort of officialization of disbanding political parties, and I believe that the parties have tried to advance a legal argument that any effort to dissolve them by the junta is illegal in and of itself, and thus they don't understand themselves as dissolved. But of course, the counter argument on the part of the junta is that they are the governing authorities, and so they have the authority to dissolve the political parties through this decree. The whole point of putting forth that decree, whether it legally stands or not, is to give a justification to the junta to round up those who take a dissenting approach. And I think that the evidence for that is you can look at the decree, which says that so it dissolves political parties, but it also forbids groups with any kind of political character from public demonstrations, other forms of organization. But they're not rounding up the people who are supporting the junta, which have a political character as well. And so it's very one-sided, and I think it's quite clear that the intent behind this dissolution decree is really to cut off any kind of dissent, round up any critics, and it has a chilling effect on society. It scares people who would otherwise potentially be critical of junta from taking any kind of action just from their own personal risk.
Well, Daniel, Dr. Suleiman also did say that he feels at the moment that the junta is more interested in stability than democracy. Now, according to some reports, one by Reuters, it says that Mali's World Bank-backed outlook forecasts growth slowing to about 3.1% in 2024, while some 90% of the populations live in poverty. That's 90% of them live in poverty. Now, economic hardships, including power shortages, job losses, they're all mounting. And also, the state's revenue from gold mining jumped from 52%, that's 52.5%, to 835.1 billion CFA francs last year under a new mining code. So, looking at all of this, positives and negatives, would you say that the junta is really addressing these issues? Is the public, even if they are, is the public seeing an impact?
I mean, I think that there isn't much positive in any of that, really. They make a lot of claims about how they're working for stability and trying to improve the economic situation and address the insecurity in Mali, but all of the data really suggests that those things are worsening since has taken power. I think that the most recent data on extremist violence in Mali shows that the number of fatalities linked to militant Islamist groups and insurgencies in the country is up by 3 times. So the 3 times the number of people being killed in that kind of violence in Mali in recent years. You can look at economic data. You mentioned the new mining code. Yeah. They've used this mining code to go after multinational corporations like Barrick Gold, which has forced these corporations to shut down their operations. But the question is, where does all the revenue go? There's I think a $54 million debt owed to one of the major energy providers to Mali. For work on a dam that provides energy to Mali, Senegal, and Mauritania. And that debt is risking the total collapse of the power grid, even more so than it is already with the cuts that Malians are experiencing on an almost daily basis. So, I think you can look at what the junta says and all the claims trying to work towards stability, but when you put those claims next to the empirical evidence on the ground of what's going on in Mali, it doesn't really seem like they're making much progress. They're quite the opposite. Things have gotten worse on the security front. Things have gotten worse on the economic front. And as we've already discussed as part of this program, things are getting much worse in terms of political rights and civil liberties, which I continue to believe that most Malians uphold as the form of governance that they would like to have. So I think that what we're seeing is this junta has become increasingly brittle, and now people are starting to stand up against it.
All right, now let's speak to Dr. Suleiman. You talked about, Daniel mentioned security, and the security situation, as we all know it, especially that in the north, remains dire, especially with persistent jihadist threats. Now, analysts suggest that internal dissatisfaction within the military as well could pose risks to the regime's stability. And you talked about how the regime is more interested in stability. So do you agree that this junta has effectively been addressing these challenges, especially the security challenges? Because Daniel seems to be of a different opinion.
I think to answer that question, we need to look at what has happened since the current government took over. We know that we've been able to, for the first time, the military government has been able to retake Kidal, which had been the hotspot of jihadist activity under previous civilian governments. Although there are issues with Timbuktu and others, including Menaka and these other places, the people see that for the first time, such a jihadist hotspot has come under the control of the government. It has fallen, and they see that as a reason why the military government should be trusted. Now, that is only one example, and I mean, I'm not denying the fact that there have been a lot of human rights abuses as part of that counterterrorism initiative by the government. But I think that we should remember also that Assimi Goita himself made his staged his first coup, blaming insecurity. And I think he came back in 2021 for the same reason, citing insecurity. So if the security situation doesn't improve, then definitely his government is at risk, which is why he needs to invest a lot more, resources in making sure the jihadist threat is controlled. Now, in terms of divisions within the government, definitely, whenever there is a coup, it's a signal that another coup can actually happen. And whenever there is an attempted coup, it's a signal that another coup is on its way coming. And divisions in the government is there, it has to be there. And if the security situation doesn't improve, this also provides an opportunity for his other factions that do not believe in him, not with him, to also take up arms and remove him from government house.
Okay. Now, just before we wrap up, would love to hear your final thoughts, both of you, but let's begin with Daniel. Daniel, let's hear your final thoughts, especially measures that you think can be taken to support some of these democratic institutions and human rights in Mali without exacerbating tensions.
Yeah, well, I think it's incredibly important right now that really the whole international community, but especially African organizations like ECOWAS, like the African Union, support the political process in Mali. From the very beginning of these coups, they have pushed for the junta to stick to a roadmap that will return constitutional order and civilian rule in Mali. And the junta has shown itself to be a bad faith actor in that negotiation. They're not really committed to that process. That's been shown time and time again in this most recent sort of event around the dissolution of political parties and the suggestion that Assimi Goita should be appointed president for the next 5 years, renewable for another 5 years after that, meaning he'd be potentially military leader in Mali for 15 years. All of that is very clearly indicating that there's no commitment to constitutional order or to civilian rule in Mali. And so I think that these international organizations, particularly the African Union and ECOWAS, need to be supportive of the political parties that are pushing back against that. They need to be supportive of Malian civil society and the democratic governance that Malians clearly want.
All right. Now let's hear from you, Dr. Suleiman. What can be done to help these institutions, without necessarily exacerbating tensions?
I think we can learn a lot of lessons from the last few years. The reason why the tensions escalated between these governments and ECOWAS in particular, and also between these governments and also, foreign countries, where some of the statements that were made by certain diplomats. So I think tensions are high. There's a lot of pressure at this moment. There's a lot of people disagreeing. And this is the time for diplomacy, I think, to work. This is the time for ECOWAS in particular to open up and begin to make certain compromises in order to bring Mali into its fold, not as a member. Mali doesn't have to be a member of ECOWAS for there to be some reasonable, discussion between itself and ECOWAS. So I think one of the best ways to support Mali is...
You talked about ECOWAS. What about the African Union?
Yes, the African Union. The African Union has more legitimacy compared to ECOWAS at this point, and I think the African Union can do exactly what I expect ECOWAS to do, but from the continental perspective, because it has more legitimacy to do so than the ECOWAS. But the point is, this is time for diplomacy to work. This is not time to stoke the fire. this is time for compromises, reasonable compromises to be made so that together we can bring Mali back to civilian rule.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and for speaking on this. Dr. Mohammed Suleiman, Founding Director, Center for Alternative Politics and Security, West Africa, and also Daniel Eizenga, PhD Research Fellow, Africa Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.